Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins. In the ancient days of the world, long before the sun and moon shone as they do now, Middle-earth lay battered and broken under the shadow of a terrible foe. His name was Morgoth, the Black Enemy, mightiest of the dark powers who had woven sorrow and ruin into every corner of the land. For many years, the free peoples of Middle-earth, elves, men, and dwarves, had fought against him, but none could overthrow his dreadful might. Yet at last, the valor, the angelic powers beyond the seas, stirred themselves to wrath. They sent forth a mighty host to challenge Morgoth's dominion. And thus began the War of Wrath, the greatest war that the world had ever seen. Mountains crumbled, seas boiled, and the very air was filled with a clash of arms and the songs of warriors who fought for freedom and for hope. For a time, the tide turned against Morgoth. His orcs fled before the shining hosts, and his Balrogs, those spirits of fire and shadow, were laid low. His great fortresses fell one by one, and he was driven back into the iron depths of Angband, his last stronghold in the north. But Morgoth had yet one final weapon to unleash, a terror so vast and terrible that even the bravest among the free peoples quailed at its coming. From the broken halls of Angband, Morgoth released his last and greatest dragons. Winged dragons, fierce and fire-breathing, whose like had never been seen before. And foremost among them was Ancalagon the Black, the eldest and mightiest of them all. Ancalagon's wings spread across the sky like a storm cloud blotting out the stars. His breath was a river of flame that turned forests to ash and mountains to glass. When he roared, the earth shook and the heavens trembled. Never before had the world witnessed such a creature, and never again would it see his like. The armies of the Valor were thrown into confusion. The dragons fell upon them like falling stars, scattering their forces and burning all before them. Despair crept into the hearts of elves and men alike, and even the great captains of the West faltered beneath the onslaught. It seemed that all their hopes would be undone in a single night of terror. But far above the burning fields and shattered mountains, another figure stirred. Eärendil the mariner, half-elven and of noble heart, had sailed beyond the circles of the world, pleading with the Valor for aid against the shadow. He was beloved among the high powers, and they had blessed him with a ship that could sail the airs as well as the seas. Gil-galad silver and bright, bearing a light from the very heart of the heavens. Now Eärendil came forth, shining as a star, steering Gil-galad through the darkness toward the roaring clouds whereon Ancalagon soared. Beside him flew the great eagles of Manwë, lord of the winds, their golden eyes fierce and their talons sharp. They had come to do battle with the dread beasts of Morgoth, and to stand beside Eärendil in this, the world's darkest hour. And thus the final duel began, high above the wreck of Angband. From the decks of Vingulr, Eärendil strung his mighty bow and sang a song of light, a song that made the shadows tremble. His arrows shone like falling stars, and he loosed them one by one into the heart of the storm. Ancalagon answered with a roar that split the very sky. He rose higher, mighty wings buffeting the air with gales that sent even the eagles spinning. His fires lashed out in rivers of molten gold, seeking to sear the shining ship from the heavens. But Vingulr was nimble and swift, and Eärendil was valiant beyond the measure of men or elves. It circled and clashed amidst the smoke and fire, a dance of light against darkness, hope against despair. Below, the armies of the Valor lifted their eyes to the heavens, their spirits rallying as they beheld the brightness of Gil-galad and the courage of Eärendil. Songs of wonder and hope stirred on their lips, for they knew that if Eärendil could bring down Ancalagon, the might of Morgoth would be broken forever. But victory would not be easily won. Ancalagon's strength was like a mountain given wings, and his fury was that of a world in ruin. Each strike of his talons could have shattered cities. Each beat of his wings drove tempests across the land. And so the battle raged on under a sky choked with fire and ash, as the fate of the world hung by a slender thread. Would the courage of one mariner and the strength of the eagles be enough to turn the tide? Or would Ancalig's wrath sweep away all hope and plunge Middle-earth into an everlasting night? The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the struggle unfolded, waiting to see whether light or darkness would prevail. And far in the hidden halls of Angband, Morgoth, the black enemy, listened for the sound of victory or doom. Far above the desolation of the world, where smoke roared and the very stars seemed veiled by the breath of ruin, Eärendil in Gil-galad rose ever higher, seeking the zenith of the heavens, where the darkness might be thinner and the winds more clear. Below him the plains of Anfaglith lay scorched and broken, a wasteland of fire and ash, where once green hills had sung beneath the winds and rivers had run free and bright. Now only the bitter smoke of burning earth ascended, casting a pall over all that lay beneath the northern sky. Ancalagon the Black, seeing his foe dare to climb beyond him, uttered a roar that shook the vaults of heaven, and with a great heave of his monstrous wings, he surged upwards in pursuit. His vast body, like a mountain crowned with flame, tore through the veils of cloud, and the stars, bright and ancient, flickered in fear at his passing. His eyes, cruel and filled with an endless malice wrought by Morgoth himself, fixed upon the silver ship that defied him, and his heart, if heart he still possessed, burned with a wrath unquenchable. Eärendil, undaunted, fitted another shaft to his bow. This was a bow of mighty make, wrought of wood from the trees of Valinor themselves, and strung with hair spun from the Queen of Stars. Each arrow he loosed was a dart of searing light, trailing fire like a comet as it sped toward its mark. Yet Ancalagon was cunning and terrible in strength. He twisted and rolled through the air so that many a shaft, though aimed true, glanced off the iron scales that clad him like a fortress. The eagles of Manwë, undeterred by the maelstrom, assailed Ancalagon fiercely, swooping upon him with talons like spears and beaks that shone as if wrought of mithril. Eärendil, greatest of all the eagles, led them, his voice ringing like a trumpet in the storm. Together they harried the dragon, darting and wheeling about his vast wings, distracting him from his pursuit of Gil-galad. Yet even they, proud and strong, could not long withstand his fury. Many was smitten by fire or by the buffet of his wings and fell from the sky. Their mighty forms writhed in flame as they plunged toward the ravaged earth. Still, Eärendil pressed on, guiding Gil-galad with a steady hand, his heart unwavering, though the heat of Angelin's breath scorched the very air about him. He sang as he fought, a song of old, a song of Elbert, the Star Queen, calling upon the powers that had set the stars aloft in the deeps of time. And as he sang, a light grew about him, a light pure and clear, so that the darkness recoiled, and the fires of Ancalagon's wrath seemed to falter. Below, the armies of the west, beleaguered though they were, beheld this light and took new heart. They lifted their banners once more, and their captains called them to renewed battle. Thus the war raged, both upon the ground and in the air, a tumult of fire, steel, and sorcery, such as had not been seen since the world's shaping. Yet Ancalagon, though mighty beyond all reckoning, had been roused from his slumber too soon and too violently. The ancient spells that Morgoth had laid upon him were strong, but not inexhaustible. Rage and battle-lust consumed him, but deep within the marrow of his being, the first seeds of weariness were sown. And Eärendil, seeing that the monster's strength, though vast, was not without limit, gathered all his might for a final assault. Gil-galad plunged from the heights, its silvery prow cleaving the darkness like a sword. Straight at Ancalagon Eärendil flew, loosing arrow after arrow in swift succession, each one striking with the force of a thunderbolt. The dragon roared and reared, his wings unfurling in a storm of blackness, and he belched forth a torrent of flame that engulfed Gil-galad in a sphere of fire. For a terrible moment, all seemed lost, but out of the inferno the ship burst forth unmarred, for it was hallowed and protected by the blessings of the Valor. And with a cry that echoed from peak to shattered peak, Eärendil loosed his final arrow, a shaft of such brilliance that the very heavens blazed with its passing. The arrow struck Ancalagon in the breast, piercing through scale and sinew, and a shudder went through the vast frame of the beast. His wings faltered, his roar of fury turned to one of anguish and despair, and writhing in agony, he began to fall. Slowly at first he descended, but gathering speed he hurtled downward, a black comet trailing ruin behind him. All the hosts of the world looked up and beheld the fall of Ancalagon. And a great cry went up from the armies of the Valor, a shout of wonder and of hope renewed, for the mightiest of Morgoth's servants was vanquished, and his dominion at last was beginning to crumble. And so Ancalagon fell, and the earth quaked beneath him. But where he would fall, and what ruin he would wreak in his death, none yet could foresee. With a sound as of the earth crying out in pain, Ancalagon the Black fell from the sky, and the heavens themselves seemed to recoil at his passing. Down he plunged, a shadow wreathed in fire, his vast wings folding like the broken sails of a doomed ship, his roar dwindling into a low thunder that rumbled across the sundered plains. The ground beneath the hosts of the Valor trembled, and many among the elves and men fell upon their faces in awe and dread. For never had such a ruin been seen in the circles of the world. Thus it was that Ancalagon came crashing upon the towers of Thanangorodrim. The mountains Morgoth had heaved up in ancient days, black and crowned with poisonous fumes. These peaks, tall and terrible, had long stood as the grim symbols of his dominion, piercing the sky with their jagged crown. But now, as the body of Ancalagon smoked them in his death, the towers of Thangorodrim were broken in pieces, and their mighty roots were torn from the earth, casting down vast avalanches of stone and flame. The smoke and dust of their ruin rose in a cloud that blotted out the sun, and the world was darkened, as if the end of days had come. Morgoth, deep within the dungeons of Unbondant, felt the fall of his champion as a wound to his very spirit. Fear the like of which he had not known since he first beheld the light of the Valar nod at his heart, and he knew at last that his power would not endure. Long had he trusted in his dragons, those dread creatures wrought of fire and hatred. And above all he had set his hopes upon Ancalagon, who alone might have turned the tide of doom. Now that hope was ended, and the walls of his fortress shook with the coming wrath. Eärendil, aboard the shining Gil-galad, hovered still above the ruin, his bow unstrung, and his heart weary but steadfast. His face was grim, and the light that had surrounded him in battle now softened, dimming to a steady glow, like the evening star that watches over the coming of night. Around him circled the surviving eagles of Manwë, their wings scarred by fire, but their spirits unbroken, and they sang songs of victory that echoed faintly through the broken heaven. Then it was that the host of the Valor, hardened beyond hope by the fall of Ancalagon, lifted their banners anew and pressed the assault upon the ruins of Angband. The ground yawned before them, rent with fissures from which black smoke poured, and the very stones seemed to resist their passage. But they came on with the thunder of a rising storm, led by the herald of Manu, whose bright armor gleamed even through the ash-laden air. Orcs and balrogs, dragons and other foul things that had long hidden in the dark places of the world, now fled in terror, their will broken with the fall of their great champion. Few there were that stood their ground, and those were swept aside by the might of the host, as leaves are scattered by the winter winds. In the deep halls of Angband, Morgoth cowered, but the valor did not yet come to him, for the ruin above must first be cleared, and the captives long held in torment must be free. In those days the slaves of Angband, elves and men alike, broken in body and spirit, were found in the deep pits, and they beheld the light once more with weeping and wonder. Some had been taken in the earliest days of strife, and the memory of freedom was but a fading dream. Yet now they were lifted from despair, and the cries of their deliverance mingled with the songs of the victorious host. But the land itself was marred beyond reckoning. Great rifts and smoking chasms scarred the face of Middle-earth, and rivers of molten rock flowed where once clear streams had danced. The ruin of Tangorodim spread for leagues, a wasteland of shattered stone and poisonous fume, and it was said by the wise that never again would that place know the touch of green things, nor the songs of birds. Still, the war was not yet ended, for Morgoth, though defeated in the field, had not been taken. Deep he delved in the earth, seeking to hide himself from the vengeance he knew must come. Yet the valor were not to be denied, and their power, long restrained, now moved like the slow, inexorable grind of mountains, overwhelming all that stood against them. Thus it was that gathered the host and ordered the assault upon the very roots of Angband. The captains of the valor bore great hammers and swords of light, and with these they smoked the gates and towers of Morgoth's fortress. The sound of their blows rang out across the land, a hammering more terrible than thunder, and the stones themselves cracked and splintered under their might. Long they labored, and the heavens wept rain mingled with ash, and the earth groaned beneath the weight of their endeavor. But at last the gates of Angband were broken, and a deep wind rushed forth, cold and foul, carrying with it the stench of death and despair. Then at last Morgoth was brought forth, bound in chains wrought by the valor themselves, so strong that not even he could break them. His crown was beaten into a collar for his neck, and his hands, once so mighty in the shaping of the world and the twisting of its beauty to evil, were shackled with unbreakable feathers. Thus ended the War of Wrath, the greatest of all wars since the world's beginning, and the power of Morgoth was broken forever. Yet though the black enemy was cast down, the scars he had wrought upon the world would endure through many ages, and the memory of his terror would haunt the hearts of elves and men until the breaking of the world itself. When Morgoth was dragged forth from the smoking ruins of Angband, a cry of mingled triumph and sorrow rose from the hosts of the West. For though victory had been won, it had come at a heavy price, and the fair lands of Beleriand were now a wreckage beyond healing. Ane, herald of Mane, stood tall among the fallen stones, his armor splashed with the black dust of battle, and he pronounced the doom of the black enemy before all the gathered armies. His voice, clear and terrible, rang over the broken plains, and the very stones seemed to heed his words. Yet Morgoth, once the mightiest of the Valar, crouched low and did not speak. For all the power of pride and guile had been stripped from him, and he was like a withered thing, a husk of what he had once been, his malice now clothed in fear. His eyes, once burning with a fire that could cow even the proudest, were dulled, and he dared not raise them to meet the gaze of Eönwë or the captains of the Valar. Thus the great and terrible was made low, and all who beheld him knew that evil, though fierce and terrible for a season, was in the end but a shadow that fled before the light. Then did he own command that Morgoth be bound with the chain Ang which the Valar had wrought in ancient days, and guarded ever since in readiness for such a time. 7 times it was wound about him, binding him hand and foot, and with mighty force he was hurled upon his face, and the earth trembled under the fall of him who had once challenged the very thrones of Arda. Now the hosts of the West turned to the cleansing of Angband's ruin, and to the tending of those who had been freed from its darkness. Many labors lay before them, and the songs of mourning and of healing rose together in that place where once only cries of agony and fear had been heard. The captives, long tormented and bereft of hope, were gently gathered and brought into the light, where the healers of the Valar tended them with songs and with waters drawn from the clear fountains of Aman, slowly as the days passed. The spark of life returned to their eyes, and they lifted their faces to the sun and the stars with wonder and with tears. Yet the world was sorely wounded, and much that was fair and free in Beleriand was lost forever. The tumults of the war had sundered the lands, and great waters unleashed from their bounds by the breaking of Thangarotum and the shattering of the earth, now poured forth, swallowing whole valleys and mountains, reshaping the face of Middle-earth. Rivers were turned aside, forests were drowned, and where once had been green fields and golden woods, there now stretched a wide and unquiet sea. Thus, in the fullness of time, much of the realm of the Elves and the dominions of men were buried beneath the waves, and the havens that had known the laughter of the Elendil became no more than dreams and memories. Only in the high places and the westernmost lands did the children of Ilúvatar find refuge, and even there the scars of war were not wholly hidden. Yet amid this ruin, a great hope was kindled. For with Morgoth's defeat, a shadow was lifted from the hearts of all living things. In the western sky, Gil-galad sailed ever bright, bearing Eärendil in the light of the Silmaril, a sign and a promise that darkness would not reign forever. Many songs were made of Eärendil's valor and the fall of Ancalagon, and these songs were woven into the lore of elves and men to be sung in later days when hope seemed faint and the night most deep. And in the high halls of Valinor, beyond the circles of the world, the Valar took counsel concerning the fate of Morgoth. For though he was bound, his evil could not be wholly unmade while the world endured. And many among the wise foresaw that his malice would yet work woe, though he himself should trouble the world no longer. Therefore, it was decreed that Morgoth should be cast beyond the walls of the world into the timeless void, whence no living thing might return. There he would dwell in exile, shut out from the world he had marred until the end of days, when he would face judgment beyond all appeal. Thus the Valar prepared their ways, and a great host of Maiar and spirits of might gathered, clad in raiment of light and bearing banners that shone like the dawn. They marched to the place of casting, singing songs of power that none could gainsay, and the sound of their singing filled the world with awe. Morgoth, bound and powerless, was brought before the gates of the void, and there he raised his voice in one last cry, a cry of hatred and despair so terrible that the mountains shook and the seas were troubled even in far-off lands. But it availed him nothing, and with a final utterance he was thrust forth into the outer dark. Thus Morgoth, the black enemy of the world, was expelled from Arda, and the first great shadow passed from Middle-earth. Yet it is said by the wise that Morgoth's spirit, though banished, left seeds of evil behind, which would spring up in later ages, and in this way his malice would yet gnaw at the world, bringing sorrow and strife to the children of Ilúvatar. Thus ended the first age of the world in ruin and in hope, and the deeds of those days became the foundation of many tales, songs, and prophecies in the ages that followed. Yet though the war was ended, and the black enemy cast beyond the circles of the world, the labors of the Valar and of the free peoples were not yet done. For the ruin left behind was great, and the sorrow of Beleriand was deep as the foundations of the earth. In the days that followed the breaking of Angband, the lords of the West set themselves to the task of healing what might be healed, and of ordering anew the affairs of Middle-earth. For they deemed that the children of Ilúvatar, both elves and men, must now shape their own destiny in the lands that remained. Onui, mighty among the Maiar, summoned the elves who had fought in the war and those who had dwelt long under the shadow of Morgoth, and he spoke to them with the authority of the Valar. He offered them pardon and a choice: to return into the west, to dwell in the lands of Aman beyond the sea, in peace and joy, or to remain in Middle-earth, to face the long burden of its mending, and to endure the coming of new sorrow. Many of the elves, weary of war and longing for the undying light, hearkened to his call and made ready to depart across the sea. Though their hearts were torn, for they loved the lands wherein they had long dwelt, and the memories of their fallen kindred clung to every hill and tree. Yet not all were willing to depart. Some among the Sinindar, the elves of starlit Beleriand, and even a few of the Númenor, who had once rebelled against the Valar and had fought long in exile, chose to remain. They saw that the world, though marred, still held beauty and mystery, and they would not abandon it wholly to men whose dominion was soon to rise. Among them were proud and noble lords, and their choice was not made out of folly, but out of love, and the unyielding spirit that no darkness could wholly extinguish. Meanwhile, among men, a great change was wrought. For I summoned the leaders of those houses of the Adine, who had fought most faithfully against Morgoth, and he blessed them, offering them a great reward for their valor and loyalty. To them was given the gift of a new land, a land apart from the sorrows of Middle-earth, yet not wholly removed from its fate. This land was to be an isle raised in the midst of the western seas, a land of beauty and bounty, where they might dwell in peace and grow in wisdom and strength. And thus it was that the Isle of Númenor was prepared, though it would not be granted to men until the full reckoning of the First Age was completed. But the seeds were sown, and the first foundations of the great kingdoms of men were laid, even as the ruins of the elder days still smoked upon the earth. Now during these days of reckoning, Eärendil the mariner, who had borne the Silmaril across the airs of the world, and whose valor had turned the tide of doom, came no more into the mortal lands. For it was decreed by the valor that he and his ship Gil-galad should sail forever through the heavens, bearing the light of the Silmaril as a sign of hope to elves and men alike. If he rode in the firmament, and a shining ship could be seen at evening and at dawn, a star of steadfast brilliance, and the elves named it Gil-galad, the star of high hope. But the fate of the Silmarils, those holy jewels wrought by Fëanor in the days of the bliss of Valinor, was not yet fully resolved. For though one was borne aloft by Eärendil, the other two remained yet hidden in the world. Many tales speak of how, in the ruin of Morgoth's realm, the two remaining Silmarils were taken by the sons of Fëanor, Maidos and Magalor, who had bound themselves by the terrible oath to recover the jewels at all cost. Yet their deeds, born of despair and pride, brought them no joy, and the Silmarils rejected them, for they had become unworthy. Thus Maidos, in torment and shame, cast himself into a fiery chasm, and the jewel he bore was lost to the deeps of the earth, while Magalor, weary and broken, cast his Silmaril into the sea, and thereafter wandered the shores of the world, singing songs of sorrow until the end of his days. Thus the Silmarils were sundered, one in the sky, one in the earth, and one in the sea, beyond the reach of mortal hands, and their light was set apart, a hidden fire that would endure until the breaking of the world. In those days, the Valor also sent messengers into the farthest corners of Middle-earth, calling to the scattered tribes of men, warning them of the perils that might yet arise from the remnants of Morgoth's evil, and offering guidance to those willing to heed it. But many men, untwittered and wild, did not listen, and they fell under the sway of dark things that still lurked in forgotten places. For though Morgoth himself was gone, the seeds of his malice, sown deep into the fabric of Arda, could not be wholly undone. And from them would spring new evils in the ages to come. Thus the world entered a time of slow healing and of renewal, yet also of division and of wandering. For the shadow of the past could not be wholly cast aside, and the children of Ilúvatar, both elves and men, bore its burden with them into the days that followed. And the memory of Ancalagon's fall, and the breaking of Thangorodrim, and the mighty deeds of the War of Wrath were woven into the songs of lore to be sung by minstrels in the halls of kings and by elven harpers beneath the stars. A reminder to all who would listen that even in the darkest hour, courage and hope might yet prevail. Now, as the First Age drew to its final close, there came a time of great choice and parting among the peoples of Middle-earth. For many of the elves, weary of strife and the long burden of sorrow, heeded the call of Yenwë and made ready to depart from the lands of their birth. From the ruins of Beleriand they gathered, some few bearing treasures salvaged from their fallen homes, but most bringing little save memory and grief. In solemn companies they journeyed westward to the shores where the ships awaited them, tall and white upon the gray waters, their banners stirring like phantoms in the sea wind. Long were those days of farewell, and sorrowful were the songs that rose upon the evening air. For though the choice to depart was freely given, it sundered many hearts. Brothers who had fought side by side against the darkness were parted. For some chose the undying lands, and some remained to endure the slow fading of the world. Lovers and friends stood long upon the shore, hand in hand beneath the stars, speaking little, for there are griefs too deep for words, and the memory of that sundering would echo in the hearts of elves until the end of time. Among those who chose to remain were the Sinindar, the gay elves of Doriath and Eärendil, who loved Middle-earth beyond all parting and would not forsake the lands where the starlight first touched their faces. Likewise, some of the new LotR, proud and steadfast, deemed that their place was among the sorrowful fields of their exile, where they would labor yet to preserve what beauty could be saved. In hidden valleys and deep woods, they built new havens, small and secret, and their songs grew softer and sadder as the long years unrolled. Meanwhile, the Valar, having completed their great work of war, turned again to the governance of Eärendil, and the ban that had long been laid upon the new LotR was lifted for those who chose to return. The lands beyond the sea became again a place of peace, filled with the light of the two trees, memory, and the shores of Valinor gleam like the edge of a dream in the sight of those who sailed west. But in Middle-earth, the power of men began slowly to wax. Those of the Edain who had fought valiantly in the war were gathered by Yane, and they were blessed beyond their kin. For it was decreed that they should depart from the ruinous lands and find a new home prepared for them by the Valar. And so it was that the island of Númenor rose from the sea, shaped by the hand of Osella and the song of Ulmo, a land of green hills and white shores, blessed with long life and great wisdom. Thither the Edain were borne across the sundering seas, guided by the star of Eärendil. And there they founded a mighty realm and grew in power and glory. Their ships became the greatest upon the face of the world, swift and fair, and they explored far and wide along the coasts of Middle-earth. Yet even in their joy, the wise among them did not forget the lessons of the elder days, nor the shadow that had once darkened all the world. There were many lands untouched by the hand of the Valar, and in those wild places the remnants of Morgoth's creatures lurked in hiding, nursing hatred and fear. Dragons without a master crept into the deep mountains. Balrogs, if any yet survived the ruin of Angband, hid themselves in caverns far from the light. Trolls and fell beasts multiplied in secret, and darker things still, whose names are forgotten, wandered in shadow and silence. Though Morgoth himself was cast into the void, his evil could not be wholly banished while the world endured, and the seeds of his malice would bear bitter fruit in the days to come. Thus it was that the second age of the world began, an age of hope, but also of vigilance. For though a great darkness had been defeated, another could yet arise. And even as the first ships of Númenor spread their sails to the wind, and the elves who remained built fair realms in the hidden places of the world, the wise knew that the peace bought by the war of wrath would not be everlasting. But for a time, Middle-earth knew a kind of healing, and the songs of the elves grew sweet once more beneath the stars. Though they were songs touched ever with sadness, for the memory of the first age, with all its glories and its sorrows, could not be forgotten. And among men, the tales of Eärendil and of the fall of Ancalagon were told by firelight and in the halls of kings, and they became the bedrock of legend, a reminder of the valor and sacrifice that had once saved the world from utter ruin. In the farthest north, where once the towers of Thanangorado Drim had stood, there remained a wasteland, desolate and deadly, where no grass would grow and no bird would sing. The very stones were blackened and poisoned by the fires of Ancalagon's fall, and the air was thick with the memory of ancient terror. Few dared venture there, and those who did spoke little of what they had seen. It was said that in the deepest pits, remnants of the old evil still festered, awaiting a time when the vigilance of the free peoples might waver, and new darkness could creep once more across the world. Thus, the passing of Ancalagon marked not only the end of an age, but also the beginning of a long watchfulness, a quiet and patient guarding against the evils that would ever seek to rise again. The fall of the greatest dragon that ever lived was a sign to all who came after, a sign that no power, however great or terrible, was beyond defeat. Yet also a warning that the struggle between light and dark was not ended, but only changed, taking new shapes beneath the turning of the years. And so Middle-earth was left to its long healing and its long waiting beneath the stars, while the mariner of old sailed forever through the heavens, his ship a beacon of hope against the endless night. In the days that followed the ruin of Beleriand, when the earth was yet raw with the wounds of war, and the seas had claimed vast tracts of the western lands, those elves who remained behind in Middle-earth began slowly to fashion new realms amidst the wilderness and the wreck. For though the memory of the ancient kingdoms lingered, their proud halls and shining cities were no more, save as broken stones beneath the encroaching forests and the restless waters. Many among the new lore turned their steps eastward, seeking lands untouched by the great ruin. And there they founded hidden strongholds and secret havens, dwelling apart from men for a time, for the grief of the elder days lay heavily upon their hearts. Thus it came to pass that in the woods of Linen, west of the Blue Mountains, where the land still bordered the newly risen seas, Gil-galad, son of Fingon, and last of the high kings of the new lore, established his realm. There he gathered the remnant of his people, both those who had returned from the wars and those who had hidden themselves during the dark years of Morgoth's dominion. And he became a beacon of strength and wisdom in a world that struggled to find its footing after the cataclysm. Lindon was a land of fair trees and swift rivers, where the stars shone bright over the waters. And Gil-galad ruled there with justice and with foresight, and the memory of the blessed realm was cherished in his halls. To the east, beyond the mountains and across wide forests, the Sinindar and the Sylvan Elves also sought to carve out homes anew, though their ways were less grand, and they loved the green growing things of the earth rather than the craft of stone and gem. In time they would found realms in Greenwood the Great and in Lothlorien, and their songs would rise once more beneath the eaves of ancient forests. But these days were yet to come, and much sorrow and wandering lay before them, for the world was not yet healed, and the embers of past evil still smoldered unseen. Meanwhile, in the wide lands to the south and east, men grew and multiplied, spreading into the empty spaces left by the retreating seas. Those of the Edain who had not journeyed to Númenor became the ancestors of many peoples, some fair and wise, others wild and prone to darkness. And the memory of the War of Wrath lingered among them like a half-remembered dream, and tales were told of the fall of Morgoth and the valor of the Valar. But as the generations passed, these stories became clouded and mingled with fear and superstition, until only the wisest among men could discern the truth from the growing mists of legend. And while the free peoples turned to the labor of renewal and the gathering of new strength, there stirred in the far places of the world the remnants of Morgoth's will. In deep caverns beneath forgotten mountains, or hidden in tangled forests where no elf dared tread. Evil things endured and multiply. Chief among these were the dragons that had escaped the fall of their master. For though Ancalagon the Black was dead, and with him perished the greatest might of the drakes, not all of his kindred had been destroyed. Some few dragons, lesser in power but still terrible in their cunning and malice, fled into the dark places of the earth. And there they brooded in secret. They waxed in strength and in craft, gathering treasures plundered from the ruins of fallen halls, and weaving spells of fear and dominion. They hated the free peoples with a burning hatred, and though they dared not yet assail the great strongholds of the elves, they waited with a patience born of long lives and deep cunning. For they knew that the hearts of men were weak and easily turned to greed and ambition. It is said by the wise that in those days of the early Second Age, the seeds were sown of many later sorrows. For in the pride of newfound strength and the confidence of seeming peace, vigilance was lessened, and the memory of ancient evil grew dim among the younger races. Few now remembered the fire that had consumed the sky when Ancalagon fell, or the shuddering of the earth under the hammering of the valor. The old world was green again, and rivers ran fresh to the sea, and men tilled their fields and sang to their children beneath the open sky, giving little thought to the darkness that might yet rise once more. But in the high courts of Lindon, Gil-galad pondered these things, and the wisest among the elves did not forget the lessons of the First Age. Long they kept watch upon the mountains and the wild places, and their messengers traveled far, gathering tidings of the lands beyond their borders. It was in these years that Gil-galad first established friendship with the scattered remnants of the Edain, who dwelt upon the shores of Middle-earth, teaching them lore and craft, and weaving bonds of alliance that would endure into the coming centuries. Yet, even as new realms arose, and the wounds of the past were slowly mended, there came whispers out of the east, faint at first and little heeded, of a shadow stirring, a shadow that was not wholly new, but bore a dread familiarity to those who had seen the ancient wars. It was said that a new power was gathering strength, one fair to look upon, and full of promises of wisdom and order, but whose heart was black with the legacy of Morgoth. Thus it was that Sauron, once the servant of the Black Enemy and his greatest lieutenant, began to make his will known in Middle-earth. Long he had hidden in the wilderness, feigning repentance and biding his time. But now he moved among the free peoples, seeking to ensnare them with gifts and cunning counsel. To men he offered knowledge and power. To elves he spoke of healing and preservation, of the renewal of lost glories. Many were deceived by his fair visage and honeyed words, and few discerned the darkness that lay behind his mask. But in Lindon, Gil-galad and his counselors, chief among them Elend, half-elven, and Curan the shipwright, held their counsel in wisdom. And they trusted not the stranger who brought gifts too easily, nor the new lords who rose too swiftly in strength and splendor. They foresaw that the peace of the early Second Age was but a fleeting respite, and that a new war, no less terrible than the first, would come upon the world. Thus the vigilance of the West was renewed, and secret alliances were forged among those who would stand against the rising shadow. Messengers were sent to Númenor, bearing warnings and seeking aid, though that mighty isle, still in the springtime of its glory, had not yet turned its full gaze eastward. And the tale of Ancalagon's fall, once a memory of hope and triumph, was again sung in the halls of the wise, a reminder that even the mightiest works of darkness could be cast down, though only with courage, unity, and sacrifice beyond all reckoning. Thus the world moved onward into the long years of the Second Age. And though peace lay upon the lands, it was a peace that bore within it the seeds of future strife. For not all who walked beneath the sun were content with the gifts of Uvatar and ambition. That ancient shadow of the heart stirred once more among elves and men. Sauron, who had once been counted among the greatest of the Maiar before his fall into the service of Morgoth, now set about to bring the world under his dominion, not by the open terror of war, as his master had done, but by guile and subtlety, cloaking his intentions in fair-seeming purposes and offering gifts to those who would take them. In the lands beyond the misty mountains, he came among the elven smiths of Arion, where Celbimbor, son of Curuan and last of the house of Feanor, had established a realm of craft and lore. And to them he spoke of mighty works, of the healing of the hurts of the world, and the preservation of all things unstained by time and decay. Long did he labor to win their trust, and many among the Guthi Mardain, the people of the jewel-smiths, were ensnared by his teachings, for they hungered to create works of beauty and power that would endure beyond the circles of the world. And so it was under his guidance and with his aid that the greatest of their works was begun, the forging of the rings of power. These were wrought with care and skill surpassing any craft since the days of the two trees, and in them was set much of the strength and will of the elven smiths, so that they might preserve all that was fair and hold at bay the slow decay of mortal time. But Sauron's purpose was not the same as theirs, though he spoke honeyed words. For in secret he forged yet another ring, the one ring greater than all the others, in which he set the vast majority of his own power, that through it he might dominate all who bore the lesser rings, and through them bring all peoples of Middle-earth into servitude. Yet the elves were not wholly deceived, for the hearts of the LotR are strong. And when Sauron put on the One Ring, intending to bind them to his will, they perceived his treachery and were filled with anger and fear. They took off their rings and hid them, and the three greatest among them, Narya, Naya, and Vilya, which had been wrought without Sauron's direct touch, were concealed and kept apart, safe from his dominion, though they could not be wholly used while the One thus was Sauron's first great design foiled. And in his wrath he descended with open war upon Aeon, laying waste to its fair cities and slaying Celebrimbor, taking many of the lesser rings for his own use. Those elves who escaped his assault fled eastward to the refuge of Imladris, which established in the hidden valley of the north. And there they made a stand against the spreading darkness, though the days were perilous and hope was dim. Meanwhile, in Númenor, the star-born kingdom of men, word came of these events through the messengers of Gil-galad and Círdan, and at first the Númenorans were stirred to pity and to wrath, for they remembered the friendship they had once shared with the elves and the alliance of the elder days. Great ships were built in the havens of Andúni, and the mariners of Númenor sailed eastward in strength, bringing aid to the embattled elves and driving back the forces of Sauron from the western shores of Middle-earth. For a time, the might of Númenor was a shield between Sauron and the free peoples, and the name of the king's men was spoken with reverence in the lands of Lindon and beyond. But pride, the ancient bane of men, grew subtly within the hearts of many Númenorans, and as their power increased, so too did their longing for dominion over the lands of Middle-earth, and their fear of death, which they could not escape despite all their wisdom and might. Thus, even as they warred against the shadow, another shadow took root in their hearts, a hunger for immortality and an envy of the deathless lands beyond the sea, where the Valor dwelt in peace. Sauron, perceiving this, laid his plans with cunning greater than any since the days of Morgoth, and bided his time, knowing that the pride of men would be his ally, if he could but turn it to his will. And so the years passed, and the Second Age wore on into its middle years. Though Sauron's first assault had been repelled, he was not defeated, and he withdrew into the heartlands of Middle-earth, there to build anew his strength and his kingdom. In the land of Mordor, he raised the fortress of Barad-dûr, a tower of iron and stone, crowned with fire. And he gathered to him all the creatures of evil that still lingered in the world, orcs, trolls, and men of dark hearts, corrupted by his lies. There he brooded, forging weapons of war and spells of binding, and the shadow of his will spread slowly across the world, darkening forest and plain alike. Even those who had not yet heard his name felt a chill in their hearts. And the beasts of the field grew more savage, and the rivers ran sluggish and dark through lands that had once been green and fair. And in the high places where the eagles soared and the stars burned bright, the wise kept vigil still, remembering the fall of Ancalagon and the ruin of Morgoth, and knowing that though the form of the enemy had changed, the evil that moved behind the guise was of the same ancient and deadly lineage. Thus the days of vigilance began anew, and though many hearts grew weary, the memory of the war of wrath and of the dragon's fall was a lamp to those who would not bow to fear, a beacon to guide them through the long and troubled years that lay ahead. Now the years of the Second Age rolled onward, and the might of Sauron grew steadily in secret. For though many deemed him broken by the wars of the early age, in truth he gathered power more craftily than Morgoth ever had. His dominion, not by brute force alone, but by the seduction of hearts and the perversion of hopes. In many lands eastward of the mountains, he was already accounted a lord and master, and men who had once been free now bowed willingly to his will, lured by promises of power, wealth, and everlasting life. Cities rose under his shadow, dark temples were built in his honor, and the tongues of the free peoples grew silent in the lands of his dominion. In Númenor, meanwhile, the hearts of men turned further from wisdom. For though the island was fairer than any land in Middle-earth, and its people stronger and more long-lived than any of the race of men, they grew restless and discontented with the doom of mortality set upon them by Ilúvatar. Fear of death gnawed at their hearts, and envy of the deathless elves who came now but seldom across the sea festered among the kings and their count. Though the early rulers had been wise and faithful, ruling in harmony with the Valor's decrees, in the later days pride blossomed like a canker in their lineage. It came to pass that Ar-Pharazôn, the mightiest and proudest of all the kings of Númenor, took the scepter. He was strong of body and resolute of will, but his heart was consumed with the desire for eternal life and dominion over all lands. And he turned his eyes eastward, where rumors spoke of Sauron's rising power, desiring not to suffer any rival. And filled with arrogance born of long prosperity, Ar-Pharazôn gathered a host such as the world had never seen, tall ships by the thousands, armed hosts clad in gold and silver, banners that darkened the sun with their number. Thus he sailed into Middle-earth with a fleet that stretched from horizon to horizon, and the hearts of Sauron's servants quailed at the sight. Seeing the might of Númenor arrayed before him, and perceiving that open war would bring only his ruin, Sauron humbled himself before the king, feigning submission. In chains of gold he was brought to Númenor. But those chains were a deceit, for though his body was bound, his spirit soon wrought a deeper enslavement. By slow and cunning words, by gifts of knowledge and promises of power, Sauron corrupted the heart of Eärendil, whispering that death was not the fate of men by right, but a punishment laid upon them by the jealous Valar, who sought to keep immortality for themselves. Thus he sowed rebellion against the Valar among the proud Númenorans, and turned their hearts from the reverence of Eru the One to the worship of the darkness and Morgoth, who Sauron named the Giver of Freedom. Under his influence, dark temples rose upon Númenor's fair hills. Smoke blackened the once pure skies, and blood was spilled upon the altars. The faithful, those who still held to the old friendship with the Elves in the memory of the West, were hunted and driven into hiding. And among them were Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion, whose line would yet play a great part in the fate of the world. Thus the doom of Númenor drew near, though few among its people perceived it. The great ships that once had sailed to bring aid and wisdom now bore warriors and priests of darkness. The songs of joy were replaced by cries of sacrifice and lamentation. The Valar, beholding the rebellion of men and their descent into darkness, were filled with grief and foreboding. Yet they did not move against Númenor, for they were bound by the decree that the children of Ilúvatar should have free will, and they feared to unleash a wrath that might mar the world irreparably. But Arthuron, urged by Sauron and blinded by pride, resolved at last upon an act of madness. He would sail to Aman itself, the undying lands, and wrest from the Valar the gift of eternal life by force, if need be. Thus he prepared his fleet, anew a host greater than any the world had seen or would see again. And he set his course for the forbidden West, a deed forbidden since the shaping of the world. The ships of Númenor passed into the westering seas, black and golden, their sails like storm clouds, their prows crowned with fire. The earth groaned at their passing, and the Valar, seeing that the will of men had overstepped all bounds, cried out to Ilúvatar. Then Ilúvatar himself moved, and a great cataclysm was unleashed. The seas rose in vast walls of water. The mountains were shaken. The world was changed. The fleet of Arth-Pharazôn was swallowed by the sea, and the ships of Númenor were dragged down into the abyss. And the king himself was trapped under fallen hills beyond the reach of mortal hands. And Númenor, the fair island, proudest work of the Valar's grace to men, was utterly destroyed. The land sank beneath the waves, and only a whirlpool and a darkness remained, where once its towers had gleamed beneath the stars. The cries of its people were lost in the roaring of the sea, and the glory of Númenor was ended forever. But not all perished. The faithful, warned in secret by the Valar through dreams and visions, had made ready ships of their own, and under the leadership of Elendil and his sons, they fled eastward before the doom fell. Through tempest and darkness they sailed, guided by the light of Eärendil shining in the heavens, until at last they came to the shores of Middle-earth. There they established the realms of Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south. And though their strength was greatly lessened from the glory of Númenor of old, they carried with them the memory of the West and the wisdom of their ancient heritage. Upon their banners was the emblem of the white tree, a symbol of hope and remembrance. And though many sorrows would come upon them in the ages that followed, they endured as a light in the gathering shadow. Thus was the world changed, Númenor lost beneath the sea, a man hidden forever from mortal lands, and the lands of Middle-earth left to their own fate. Yet Sauron, who had wrought the downfall of the greatest kingdom of men, was not destroyed in the ruin he had caused. For his spirit, though bereft of bodily form, fled back to Middle-earth, bearing with it hatred undying for elves and men, and a resolve to subjugate all that remained. And so the Second Age marched toward its last and most terrible wars. Power, after the downfall of Númenor, Sauron, who had lost his fair form in the ruin of the sea, yet returned in spirit to Middle-earth. And there, gathering what strength he could, he cloaked himself once more in a terrible guise. No longer could he assume a fair and pleasing shape, but he clothed himself in shadow and hatred, and his presence became a fear to all living things. His power, though diminished, was yet mighty, and he bent his will upon the gathering of new armies and the fortification of his dark realm in Mordor, where Barad, the Dark Tower, still rose, grim and unyielding against the sky. To this place flocked orcs and men of evil heart, drawn by promises of dominion and the lust for plunder, and among them Sauron swed the seeds of a new war that would engulf the free peoples of Middle-earth. Long and patient was his labor, for he knew that though the faithful had escaped Númenor's ruin and had established realms in exile, their strength was yet young and their roots shallow in the new soil. Thus Elendil, High King of the Dunedain, who ruled in Arnor and watched over Gondor through his sons and Anarion, set his gaze ever westward, knowing that the power of Sauron would not long remain idle. Strong towers were raised, and cities fortified, and the white tree-can scion of Nimloth that had bloomed in Númenor was planted anew in Minas Ithil as a sign of hope and a memorial of the friendship of the Eldar and the Ed. Yet despite all their labor and watchfulness, Sauron struck with sudden might, and his hosts poured forth from Mordor like a tide of blackness. Minas Ithil fell beneath his onslaught, though Isildur, escaping with a seedling of the white tree, fled northward to his father. The Nazgûl, the Ringwraith's chief among Sauron's servants, rode now openly, terrible to behold, and fear spread through the lands like a poison. In this dark hour, Elendil and Gil-galad, High King of the Elves of the West, took counsel together, for they saw that alone neither elves nor men could hope to stand against the might of Sauron. Therefore they forged the last alliance, a pact sworn in blood and hope, and their banners were gathered from all the free peoples willing to make war upon the Dark Lord. From Linmont and Rivendell came the elves in glittering companies, fair and terrible to behold. And from Arnor and Gondor came the hosts of men, bearing swords of westernness and shields bright with the emblems of their lost isle. Dwarves also answered the call, few in number, but of great valor. And even among the wild peoples of Middle-earth there were those who rose against the gathering darkness. Thus it was that the last alliance of elves and men was formed, and in solemn ceremony upon the plains of Rivendell they swore their oaths beneath the stars. Songs were sung, and swords were blessed, and the hosts marched eastward with banners flying and horns sounding across the wide lands. They came at last to the black land of Mordor, and there upon the plain of Dagorlad, before the gates of the Black Land, was fought the greatest battle of the Second Age. Long and grievous was the struggle, and the earth was soaked with blood, and the cries of the slain echoed across the barren fields. Yet in the end, the forces of the Alliance prevailed, and the hosts of Sauron were broken and scattered, and the Dark Lord himself withdrew behind the walls of Barad. Then they laid siege to his fortress, a siege that lasted 7 years, during which time many deeds of valor and sorrow were wrought. The land about the tower was laid waste, and the rivers ran red with blood, and the fields became a desert of ash and bone. At length, seeing that his doom was near, Sauron came forth in his terrible might, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and with Elendil upon the slopes of Mount Doom. Long they fought, and the earth quaked beneath their strife, and the heavens were darkened with storm. But at last Gil-galad and Elendil fell, for Sauron's might was beyond the strength of any one living creature. Yet in their death they dealt him a mortal blow. And Isildur, son of Elendil, taking up the hilt shard of his father's sword, Narsil, struck the one ring from Sauron's hand, and the Dark Lord was overthrown. His spirit fled, and his bodily form was destroyed. And for a time, great peace came upon the world. The towers of Barad-dûr were broken, though the foundations could not be undone, for they had been wrought with the power of the ring, and that ring was not destroyed. For Isildur, standing upon the field of victory, took the ring for himself, defying the counsel of the wise, and claiming it as Weregild for the death of his father and brother. Thus the seeds of future woe were sown even in the hour of triumph. For the ring, though seemingly but a trinket of gold, held the will and power of Sauron within it, and it sought even then to corrupt and ensnare its new bearer. And so the shadow, though cast down, was not wholly ended, and the long watch against its return began anew. For as long as the one ring endured, the spirit of Sauron would endure also, though bodiless and hidden. Thus ended the second age of the world, with sorrow mingled with victory, and the memory of Ancalagon's fall and the great deeds of the first age faded slowly into legend. Though the wise did not forget, and the tale of light and darkness continued, for Middle-earth is ever a place where hope and despair are woven together in the long weaving of fate. Thus the world entered into the third age, and though the armies of Sauron were scattered and his dark throne cast down, the victory of the last alliance was neither complete nor without grievous cost. For the greatest among the kings and princes of the Eldar and the Edain had fallen, and their loss was a wound that no triumph could wholly heal. In the high north, Elend half-elven returned to Imlederis, bearing with him the memory of ancient sorrows and the burden of vigilance. For he knew in his heart that evil, though maimed, was not yet wholly vanquished from the world. Isildur, king of Arnor and Gondor, took upon himself the burden of rule. Yet the one ring which he had claimed from the hand of Sauron began to work upon his spirit with subtle malice. Though he had meant to guard it and keep it as an heirloom of his house, intending perhaps one day to understand its powers, the ring wove its enchantments about him, feeding his pride and clouding his judgment. Counsel was given to him by the wise, urging that the ring be destroyed, but Isildur would not listen, and so he bore it with him as he journeyed northward, intending to return to the lands of Arnor. It came to pass, however, that in the Gladen fields by the waters of the Anduin, Isildur and his small company were set upon by a host of orcs, remnants of Sauron's broken armies that had fled into the wild places. Outnumbered and taken unawares, they fought valiantly, but at length they were overwhelmed. In that hour of desperate flight, Isolde put on the ring, seeking to escape by the power of invisibility. But the ring betrayed him, slipping from his finger as he swam the river, and he was revealed to the eyes of his pursuers. Arrows flew thick and fast, and Isildur, heir of Númenor and last bearer of the hopes of men, fell upon the banks of the Anduin, pierced by many shafts, and the ring was lost to the river's depths. The best began the long wandering of the ring, for it was not destroyed, nor could it be forgotten. Beneath the waters of the world, it lay hidden a secret peril, until at last it would rise again to bring about new strife and sorrow in later ages. And in the absence of its mastery, the realm of Gondor endured long and gloriously, yet slowly faded, as did all things made by the hands of men. Meanwhile, in Middle-earth, the power of the elves waned as the years grew long. Though they had been great in valor and wisdom, their hearts were weary of the world, and many sought passage into the west, to the undying lands of Aman, now sundered from mortal reach, but still open to the firstborn by the grace of the valor. Ships sailed from the fading shores of Middle-earth, yet not all would depart. Some, like Galadriel and Celeborn, remained to tend the hidden realms of the elves, to guard what beauty and wisdom yet remained against the slow encroachment of darkness. In Lothlorien they preserved a memory of ancient days, and in Eärendil the lore of the elder days was kept alive. Gil-galad was no more, and Lindon grew quiet under the rule of the elven lords, who lingered still, watching with weary eyes the slow changes of the world. But in the deep places of the earth, and in the forgotten wilds, the servants of Sauron stirred once more. Though the Dark Lord himself was cast down, his spirit was not destroyed, and in secret he gathered his strength like smoke coiling unseen through the cracks of the world. Whispers came to the wise, tidings of fell things growing bold in the dark places, of shadows lengthening across the eastern lands, of strange sorceries and black towers rising far from the sight of the free peoples. In the great halls of Khazad-dûm, the dwarves delve deep, seeking the treasures of the earth. And in their pride and thirst for wealth, they delve too greedily and too deep, awakening an ancient terror from the foundations of the world. A Belrog of Morgoth, surviving from the elder days, rose from its slumber and wrought ruin in the halls of the dwarves. And thus Khazad-dûm became a place of darkness and dread, and its gates were shut and its people fled. Thus slowly and quietly the shadows gathered, and the peace that had followed the fall of Sauron grew thin and uncertain. In the north, the kingdom of Arnor was divided among the sons of Isildur, and in its weakening, evil things crept back into the lands once guarded by the strength of Númenor. In the south, Gondor stood proud and strong for many years, but its kings were beset by war and plague and internal strife, and the line of Anarion faded into steward, and still the One Ring lay hidden beneath the waters of the Anduin, lost but not destroyed, a peril sleeping in the deep, awaiting the hour of its return. For the power of Sauron was bound to it, and while it endured, he could not wholly perish. His spirit, though diminished and formless, endured, a lurking malice, seeking the means to take shape once more. Thus were the seeds of future woe sown. And though the world seemed fair, and the stars shone bright upon the fields of Middle-earth, the wise knew that the long struggle between light and darkness was not ended, but only paused, and that the greatest trials were yet to come. And through all these years, the memory of the elder days lived still in the songs of the elves, in the lore of the wise, and in the dreams of men who half remembered the days when dragons fell from the sky and the hosts of the Valor had marched against the black enemy of the world. For even as the shadows grew once more, the hope kindled in the deeds of old remained, a hidden fire in the hearts of the free peoples, waiting to blaze forth anew in the hour of greatest need. Thus the long years passed, and though the face of Middle-earth changed with the turning of the ages, and kingdoms rose and fell, and the songs of elves and men faded into memory, yet the great struggle between light and shadow endured. Hidden beneath the day-to-day labors of the peoples of the world, in the dark corners of the earth, the power of Sauron waxed once more, slow and secret, gathering like a storm behind the mountains of the east. And many among the free peoples, weary of long watching and dulled by the peace that lay upon their lands, perceived not the creeping peril. Yet there were those who did not forget, who remembered the high deeds and the high cost of the elder days, and who kept vigilant against the return of evil. The Dunedain of the north, heirs of the broken kingdom of Arnor, wandered as rangers in the havens of Lindon. Caidan still tended the ships that would sail west. And in Rivendell, Elrond preserved the memory of ages past, teaching those few who would listen the wisdom of the firstborn. And in Leighton, Galadriel watched over the Golden Wood with the aid of Ninya, the Ring of Water, maintaining a sanctuary of light in the encroaching darkness. Though she foresaw that even the might of the elves could not forever withstand the slow decay of time and the malice of the enemy. The three rings were hidden and wielded in secret, sustaining the beauty and life of their realms. Yet their power, too, was tied to the fate of the one, and the wise knew that no victory could be final until the One Ring was found and destroyed. In Mordor, the Dark Tower rose once more, rebuilt upon its ancient foundations, and the eye of Sauron, lidless and wreathed in flame, turned its gaze westward. From the Black Lands issued forth new hosts of orcs and fell creatures, while men from the east and south, long ago ensnared by the promises of power and wealth, marched under banners of darkness. The free peoples were again beset on every side, and the days of peace and quietness were numbered. Yet the hope of the world was not wholly extinguished, for in the dark places small fires were kindled, and courage endured among the humble and the great alike. The tale of the elder days lived on, not merely in the grand halls of kings or the deep lore of the wise, but in the songs of wanderers, in the dreams of children who gazed upon the evening star, and in the hearts of those who cherished freedom and light, though they knew it not. And so it was in the fullness of time that the ring, long lost in the deeps of the Anduin, was found once more by an unlikely creature, and the last great tale of the Third Age began. A tale that would see the end of many things, of the elves' dominion in Middle-earth, of the kingdoms of men in their ancient form, and of the lingering evil that had shadowed the world since before its making. Yet in that tale also was fulfillment of oaths long sworn and labors long endured, of hopes kindled in the darkest hours, and of the courage of the small against the might of the terrible. For as the wise have ever said, the deeds of the great may shape the world, but the fate of all rests often in the hands of the humble. Thus the memory of Ancalagon the Black, the mightiest of all dragons, and the fall of Thangorodrim in the last war against Morgoth, became a story of warning and of hope, that no darkness, however vast and terrible, is beyond the power of the free peoples to withstand, that no evil, however ancient and mighty, may endure forever against the courage, the unity, and the unyielding spirit of those who will not bow. And so ends the tale of the wrath of Ancalagon, a tale of fire and ruin, of hope and sacrifice that lives still in the hearts of those who love the stars, the sea, and the green hills of the world, and who remember that even in the shadow of fear, the light shines undimmed, and the spirit of the free